Let's see what happens.
All right, so we have one person in. Hello to everyone that's joining. I want to give it maybe a minute or so, and then we will get started. In the meantime, if you just put in the chat where you're joining us from, we would love to know where everyone is joining from today. So go ahead and put that in the chat if you can. And just let everyone know this is being recorded, so we will send you out a replay tomorrow. And I'll probably say it a few times throughout the webinar, but it is being recorded. So if you need to leave early, it's perfectly fine. You will definitely get a recording of this tomorrow. And I think everyone should be able to type in the chat. So yeah, if you just want to put where you're joining us from in the chat to everyone joining us today, that will be great. Just love to see those different places you all are joining from. Yeah, I see something in the Q&A. Maybe the chat's not working.
I tried
It shows.
something in chat.
Okay, I can see yours. I did someone put something in the Q&A box. So Torino, Italy, nice. I wonder how is the weather over there in Italy today? I wonder, is it just right, cold, warm? Just let us know. All right. So I think we have a quiet crowd today, which is fine. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started with our guest today from Yoast, and I will let them introduce themselves and take us away.
Cool. Thanks, Carmen. I will kick this off and I will start sharing my screen as well, because that helps with introducing my dear coworker Marina and me. Let me check if this will work out. I think it should. So you should be able to see our amazing designed slides right now. Today we're going to talk about how to uncover the power of inclusive language. And that's all pretty content-based. So apart from hearing where you're from, it would be super awesome if you could share what your role in content is. So do you write content? Do you edit content? Maybe you have another role of like managing content on a website, because then we can tie in your answers to our presentation today. And of course, we would also love to know if you already are aware of inclusive language and using that on a daily basis. And if not, that's fine as well, of course. I have to get the chat in my screen. Yeah, so now I can actually read what everybody will be typing. So take your chance to share that with us while I will introduce the team in front of you. Marina, would you start introducing yourself, please?
Yes, sorry, it's important to unmute myself first. But yeah, well, hello everyone. Let me just say that I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to take part in this webinar tonight, and I'm very interested to hear what everyone joining tonight has to say or ask about today's topic. And yeah, just a very short introduction of myself and the project. I started working at Yoast about a year and a half ago. And firstly, I worked on our project to introduce Japanese to our content analysis, which is work that I'm really proud of. And at the same time, my team started the research needed for the inclusive language feature, which means that we've been working on it for a pretty long time now, as I said, about a year and a half. And it's truly been a labor of love, sweat and tears. And yeah, on the non-Yoast related side, I'm very interested in multimodal communication, about the way that we communicate with all our modalities by speaking, listening, gesturing, but also by sign, by touch. And one example I can share is that blinking is communicative, actually, because human beings blink a lot, but that only happens when speaking with other people. And there are even differences between short and long blinks, which I personally find fascinating. But I'm going to stop here and I'm going to let Ninka introduce herself too.
Thanks, Marina. That was actually pretty interesting. I think we already learned something new today with the blinking. And now I'm going to pay attention if we're blinking all the time. As for me, I'm responsible for the partnerships and community team at Yoast. With these teams, I'm establishing and improving all kinds of relationships with other companies like LearnDash, of course, within the WordPress space mainly. We do some like trips to Shopify and other platforms every now and then, but WordPress is the main space where we're playing in. I have a background in B2B marketing, and I'm truly passionate about customer success. In my opinion, talking to people with words in a way they feel included is crucial for business relationships to succeed. So inclusive language is also there in my daily job. For example, something that happens really often and without even going noticed, like, is addressing a group of people like guys instead of people. And I really am learning myself to try, when I'm talking to decision makers or other important partners, to address this group of people as people, so the non-male people actually feel included in my story as well. But of course, there's a lot more to inclusive language than just naming people at the right gender identity that they would love. So we're going to take a deep dive into inclusive language today. Let me explain a bit about what we will be covering today, so you know what to expect. We'll start obviously with explaining what inclusive language actually is, because that might be a little bit of a daunting topic. Then we'll show some non-inclusive examples, so it actually gets more practical for you to recognize these non-inclusive language examples. We'll take a short trip to Yoast SEO and show you in a demo how the inclusive language feature actually works and helps you to write more inclusively. And then we'll cover some common misconceptions, because those are there as well, and actual benefits of writing more inclusively for your brand, your business, or just for your own sake, and some quick tips to get you started after this webinar. And obviously there will be some time for questions as well, because we would love to answer your questions on this topic. Okay, let's dive in. Like in business, communicating on the web is all about getting people to know, like, and trust you. Someone's first visit to a website is oftentimes compared to a first date, and that's not without reason. During that first date, there are a lot of things that can go wrong that might prove that you're not as likable or trustworthy as your date has hoped for. So you could think of being rude to a waiter, for example, or maybe making their stupid comments about someone in a restaurant, or maybe during a story that you're sharing, and your date is put off by that. So the same goes for your website, actually. Some ways of expressing yourself can actually be a turnoff for people in marginalized groups, or people who are close to marginalized groups. They will leave your site and never come back, and might even share that bad experience with their peers or people online. And it doesn't really matter if you're selling physical items in a web shop, trying to attract new students for your courses, or even simply just sharing your views online as an expert in your field. People prefer to do business with people they know, like, and trust. So choosing inclusive language will actually help you to build that trust, and will, of course, gladly help you to make that a new habit. So let's see if I missed anything in the chat. Yep, no, I did. That's good. By the end of this presentation, we'll make this practical. We'll hope to send you back to work or whatever you were doing before joining this webinar with 3 lessons learned. The first lesson, you'll understand what inclusive language actually is and how every website owner benefits from using it. You'll be aware of what the most common misconceptions around inclusive language are, and you'll know how to get started on your journey to make this a new habit, writing more inclusive. So I hope that sounds cool, because then Marina can explain what inclusive language actually is from a linguistic perspective.
Right.
There you
Thank
go.
you, Ninka. Right. So what exactly is this inclusive language that we keep talking about? Well, the name kind of speaks for itself. Given that it's called inclusive, it refers to the kind of language that doesn't exclude people from groups that face discrimination, or people who are from the so-called marginalized groups. That is, groups that for one reason or another hold less power in the society that they live in. And I think that we're all aware that people can face discrimination on different grounds, for example, on the basis of their ethnicity, which could include where they come from, what hue their skin is, what kind of accent they've got, and even what sort of music they listen to. And on the slide, we've also listed other aspects that can be a basis for discrimination, which we also base our analysis on. And then I'm just gonna read them aloud. Race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, age, appearance, socioeconomic status. And a lot of you might be familiar also with the term intersectionality, which is when several of these aspects overlap. That happens most of the time in real life. For example, an older woman can be at a disadvantage at her workplace because of both her age and gender, which happen to be factors that she can't control and are also completely natural. But yeah, that's the world that we live in. Anyway, such stereotypes and such stigma, they're weaved in our everyday lives, sometimes quite subtly and sometimes less so. And this very much applies to our language too, to the way that we speak, because the word choices that we make when we communicate have real impact on real people. And going back to the idea of inclusive language, again, it's about choosing words and expressions that don't reinforce prejudice, that don't reinforce harmful stereotypes. Because non-inclusive words and expressions, they do affect other people. Words have the power to harm people. They can make us feel not just disrespected and unimportant, but also straight up invisible. And even in the most egregious cases, stripped from our humanity. Even that, if that might not be the intention of the speaker. At the same time, words also have the power to make us feel respected, like we're seen and appreciated. So if we can build the habit of leaving out non-inclusive phrases and instead choose inclusive wording, then our way of expression will have a positive impact that can lead to a more inclusive society. And in addition, language has the power to shape our worldview. Because if you hear or read something often enough, if you say it all the time, then you're much more likely to accept it, often unconsciously, and it becomes internalized. And now we can look at a specific example. Here you can see two possible ways of describing someone who is in a wheelchair, and both are in quite popular usage. So you could say that someone is confined to a wheelchair, or that they are using a wheelchair. And each expression carries certain subtle connotations, and I believe it evokes different images of what wheelchairs are, what a disability is. So we haven't, well, I personally haven't conducted research about it, so it's possible that not everyone agrees with this, but for me personally, the phrase confined to a wheelchair does carry negative associations of kind of being trapped. It makes it sound like being in a wheelchair is some sort of tragedy, and it creates the impression that a person is permanently attached to the wheelchair, which is most likely not the case, as most wheelchair users don't need their wheelchair at all times. And on the other hand, the phrase using a wheelchair seems to have much more kind of neutral and perhaps even positive connotations, because all of us use different objects and devices that make our lives easier, like a phone. And there's nothing tragic about it, right? In fact, it's great that these tools exist. They can help us navigate the world more easily, more independently. And that's exactly what wheelchairs do too. Just like, for instance, prescription glasses. So having these two expressions with very different colors, if you like, if you keep hearing one of them over and over again, the way you view wheelchairs or wheelchair users, or even physical disability in general, your impression will be influenced slightly. In one case, by attaching more negative connotations to it, and in the other case, attaching more positive, or at least just neutral associations. Right, so now that we've defined what inclusive and non-inclusive language is, we can look at a few more examples. And I'm going to show you some sentences from made-up events that have used non-inclusive phrases in their advertisements or descriptions. And we can discuss with all of us in this webinar which words or expressions might be non-inclusive, what the reason for that is, and what are the possible alternatives that we could use for them. All right. So this is the first one we're going to start with. And it says, sign up for this music event featuring local gypsy artists. So my question again is, what is the potentially non-inclusive term here? And if you do have an idea, please share it in the chat. And if anyone happens to know a bit about the background, the etymology of this term, you could share it too.
So I hope some people will share their thoughts. That would be nice.
Am I allowed to participate as well?
Go for it.
Okay, I'm going to say the word gypsy.
Yeah, totally right.
What would you use?
So, yeah, what would be an alternative, and also why is it actually non-inclusive?
Well, I don't know what the alternative would be for it, but it just seems like from just what I've always kind of heard, it's a very I don't want to say derogatory, but word for people, and I don't know what the right term is for it, but I just kind of heard that in passing, that it's kind of like not okay to say, but not sure what the alternative is for that one.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the answers then. Well, the main one is, as you said, gypsy is considered a racial slur by many Romani people, which of course makes it obviously non-inclusive. And the word actually comes from Egyptian, because there was a popular myth in Europe that Roma people originated in Egypt, when in fact they migrated from the Indian peninsula. And also because of the long history of racism against Romani people in Europe, the word has become laden with negative connotations and stereotypes. And that's why the advice is to use the word Romani and Roma instead, which is a neutral term. And it's how most Romani people want to be called. And you can see this is a screenshot from our analysis. This is how it looks. And you can see that it includes these alternatives. But I would also like to insert a disclaimer here, a big one. And it's that if we're talking about someone who wants to be referred by a certain word, then it's okay to use it when talking about them. Obviously, that's not true for every single word. It's always context dependent. But in this case, some Romani people have actually reclaimed the term, and they do want people to use it when referring to them. And so one of the most important rules that trumps all others is that we should respect how people want to be called. That's the conclusion here. All right, we could move on to the next slide. And the second example that we got here says both women and men are welcome to attend this childbirth course. So again, here we've got a non-inclusive phrase. And if you have any idea about which it could be, feel free to share it. And
See if we'll get some responses in the chat now. We've done one example. Maybe that helps. Non-binary people is one.
non-binary people
I think
is
that would be the alternative, probably.
an alternative.
Something. So Tuan, can you
So
explain for which terms you want to use? Non-binary?
everyone,
Men and women.
right. So men and women is the phrase that is potentially non-inclusive. And I think, yeah, I agree with the suggestions in the chat. Non-binary people are obviously not included in this expression, and everyone is I think it's a really good suggestion as an alternative.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for your answers. If we go to the next slide, yes. So as we already discussed, women and men can be exclusionary towards people of other genders. As one of you already mentioned, if you identify as non-binary and you're pregnant, for instance, you might not feel particularly welcome to join these childbirth classes when you read the description. Even if you understand that the person who wrote this most likely doesn't mean that you shouldn't actually join the course, that they wouldn't like you to be there, you might still feel a bit hesitant to join it. And this phrasing simply doesn't signal an inclusive and welcoming environment towards people of all genders. So an inclusive alternative might be, as Carmen suggested, everyone is welcome, or for instance, people of all genders, or both pregnant people and their partners are welcome to attend. But of course, it depends exactly what it is that that you want to say. It's not like there is only one possible alternative to it. All right, we do have a few more examples. Actually, only one. So the first sentence, I'm going to read it. It says, if you're a bit OCD about keeping things organized, you might enjoy a career as professional organizer. So, same question. What word or which words are potentially non-inclusive, and what we could use to replace them?
I think this is a term you hear pretty often, right? People just.
Yeah, we do use it quite a lot. Addison's suggestion is OCD, and yeah, this is the one that that we flagged here. So OCD is a disorder. OCD with meticulous. That's a very good suggestion. I hope so. A suggestion from Tuan Pham. And I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yeah.
Right, another suggestion.
Welcome. Yeah. Super
Yeah,
simple.
if you love keeping things organized. Right.
Keep out of the whole OCD part. Yeah.
The diagnosing.
Yeah, the diagnosis.
Exactly. So OCD is short for obsessive compulsive disorder, and it is an actual medical condition. So when we use this term to casually and humorously describe personality traits or habits, for example, being pedantic or extremely organized, this trivializes the medical condition. And it also contributes to a certain extent to the ongoing trend of mental health conditions not being taken seriously. You could say that it also perpetuates stereotypes about OCD, like that it's a disorder that's mostly about being obsessed with tidiness, and that's not all of it at all. So we already have suggestions here. Meticulous, I think, is a great one. If you love keeping things organized, or if you're passionate about keeping things organized, yeah. So you keep the meaning completely, but you don't use an actual medical term lightly. So now we're going to, firstly, thank you very much, everyone, for your suggestions and comments. And now we're going to see how the inclusive language in Yoast SEO can help you to fix these kind of non-inclusive language cases, which might pop up sometimes in your writing.
Cool. Yeah, we might, before we dive into the feature, answer the 2 questions that came in through the chat, because I think they're applicable to the first example we just, or in the Q&A, I'm sorry, we just mentioned during the first example. The first question is, when using terms to include individuals who identify as non-binary, sometimes it feels exclusive or that it takes away others' identity as man or woman. How would you maneuver that situation? And I think it ties in pretty well with Andy's question as well, like the ladies and gentlemen, how should that be adapted? I think in general, you could just make it more general, make it people, make it everyone, make it like you don't have to exclude people to include others. You just can make it general so everybody will feel welcome, right? I think that's a really quick answer to those questions, but it's just as in between. Or am I missing something here, Marina?
Yeah, no, it's true. I think that sometimes we're just a bit blind to all the alternatives that exist simply because we're so used to these established phrases. Now, for instance, ladies and gentlemen, I think even people who don't know much English, they've heard ladies and gentlemen because it's repeated so many times again and again and again. But you can say, for instance, honorary guests, dear honorary guests, if you're at a very fancy event. You can say every friends, or we'd like to address everyone present. So yeah, English and any other language actually has infinite possibilities of expressing yourself. So every time that you're not sure, if you can't think of an example, I mean, I personally would firstly Google it. I guess that's what I always do when I'm not sure about something. But there are definitely other alternatives. And for instance, terms for the other question, for the first one, yeah, I think that a term that takes away others' identity as a man or a woman, again, I think unless you're very specific, for instance, right now I'm only addressing non-binary people. It's I think it is quite easy to be inclusive. Again, you can say everyone, people of all genders. Yeah.
You don't have to pinpoint them all to include.
Exactly. You don't have to elaborate. You also don't have to, I don't know, this is a complex question. How do you actually identify? Some people find labels very useful, some people don't. So I think as the more general that you are in such cases, the better.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, let's dive into a little bit of the inclusive language feature in Yoast SEO. Marina, you can start sharing your screen with the demo site. Well, I'll be giving a small, let's see if that works. Perfect. Yeah, all works. So before we will look at the inclusive language feature in Yoast SEO, I want to say that with any new habit, it takes time and practice to really get it. So I'm super happy everybody's asking questions here, because that means you're getting used to think about this, and you will make a ton of mistakes in the future, and that's okay. Just the awareness is the first step. Try to be aware of what you're saying, and then you'll get there. You can also help other people to get there. So the inclusive language analysis in Yoast SEO will help you to become aware of what terms that you are using that may be perceived as non-inclusive. It will suggest you alternatives, refers you to resources to learn more. And it's included in both our free and paid plugins. So which version of Yoast you have doesn't matter. It's there. So let's take this tool for a spin. We have a basic demo site that you see on the screen, Marina's screen at the moment. And first of all, it's good to know that this analysis is not switched on by default. So you will have to activate it yourself. And as you can see, there's this box that you can find inclusive language. It's grayed out. When it's not activated, it will become lively in color with other flowers when it's activated. So that's pretty straightforward. Then you go, after saving this, you go to a post. And we have a little example post here. And if we open the Yoast sidebar, you will see, or here down in the meta box, you will see we have written a non-optimized SEO readable text here, but we're all here for the inclusive language feature. So you see, if we click, we expand the inclusive language check, that it will show some red and orange traffic lights. So the red ones indicate terms that are really non-inclusive under all circumstances. So try to come up with alternatives for that one, because no matter what your content is about, it's probably harming some people. The orange one actually indicate that the terms are potentially non-inclusive, and it really depends on the context in which you use them if they are. So you'll probably use our tools or our other checks as well, like me, like scrolling up and down, what should I edit? Actually, the eye icon that's on the right side of these checks in the sidebar will highlight the part that you could change. So in here you say, you see, sadly, we can all be a bit lame. And that's the word we'll actually want to come up with something else for. So it says red traffic light, avoid using the word lame. And for the orange one that Marina just highlighted as well, we just have seen this example as well. Women and men prefer doing business or building relations with people they know. So that could be transferred into everyone or everybody, unless you actually are just talking about women and men, then it's fine. But in this context, I don't think that's the case. So what you also see is that there's a learn more link in every of those inclusive language checks. And those will actually bring you to a resource about the type of non-inclusive language that you're using. So in this case, it's one about disability and neurodiversity, in which you can actually learn more about why it is harmful, what are alternatives, and how you could prevent this from happening in the future. And you will also see a lot of external resources. As you see here, the first one is linking through to the World Health Organization, because at Yoast, we firmly believe that it's a healthy habit to check more sources to form your own opinion, instead of just listening to us because we think it's a non-inclusive term. So we really want to educate you on the non-inclusive language that's been used here. So I hope this gives you a quick insight in what we will do to help you write more inclusive language. So I'm looking at the clock. We have to make a little bit of a hurry here, but we'll be fine. Marina, you should all be able to see my screen again. We're switching on and on here. Can you talk us through 5 of the common myths about non-inclusive language or inclusive language?
I sure can. Right. So let's start with misconception number one. And that's something that we already touched upon, and is that whether language or certain expression is inclusive or non-inclusive, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't have any real life effects. So we did address it earlier shortly, but it's an important point, so I'd like to expand on it a bit. So language has the power to normalize ideas. And people whose job is specifically to communicate with the general public, such as journalists or politicians or PR specialists, they're very aware of this fact. And if we use non-inclusive language, we normalize non-inclusive ideas. And if we use inclusive language, then we normalize inclusive ideas. Also, language has the power to exclude or to straight up hurt people. It can function as a microaggression in mundane, everyday conversation by reminding discriminated people of their place in society in big quotes. And language can have also the opposite effect. It can make people feel respected when they hear, for example, that they are actually addressed in the way that they prefer. So we can go to the second misconception, and it's that inclusive language is a brand new 21st century invention. And yeah, the topic of inclusive language has been quite popular lately, so it may make it seem like it's some new trend, but language has always been connected to the norms in our society and culture. And we use language to talk about the same thing, about the society that we live in, our own cultures. And so language reflects what we talk about. As a result, language plays a role in spreading established norms. Now, when norms change, language, of course, changes as well in order to reflect it. And when people try to challenge ideas which are harmful, they often also challenge the use of language that reflects and normalizes these ideas. For instance, feminist activists of the 1960s, 70s were challenging the use of words like he or man to refer to humans in general. And this was part of their fight to increase the visibility, to increase the status of women, because it's weird that we should default to he when the world is obviously made up of more than just men. Now, the third misconception is the advice on inclusive, the fact that advice on what is inclusive never changes. So without a question, it would be nice if we just had to memorize a finite list of non-inclusive terms and their inclusive alternatives, and then we're done, and that's it. We'll be set, ready to be using inclusive language for the rest of our lives. But unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that. As our understanding of ourselves and of the world around us evolves, as the world keeps changing, then our collective understanding of what language is inclusive and what isn't naturally also changes. And what's more, when a marginalized group continues to be discriminated against, then even new and inclusive terms that are used to refer to them can start to be associated again with negative stereotypes, because those stereotypes still exist in the society that they live in. So there we have a bit of the chicken and egg thing, which came first, the non-inclusive word or the non-inclusive behavior? Well, they influence each other, actually. Now, I'd like to dive just a bit deeper on how our general collective understanding of what is really inclusive, how that changes. For example, you may have heard the advice to use terms like people with disabilities instead of disabled people. And the argument is that phrases like disabled people reduce people to their disabilities, while phrases like people with disabilities help to separate the person and their disability. And this recommendation gets some things right. So it's true to some extent, because, for instance, it's much better to use the word disability compared to, say, handicap or special needs, but it doesn't get everything right. And in fact, it reflects non-disabled people not fully understanding the experiences and desires of disabled people. Many disabled people have actually objected to this advice, saying that they actually like to be called disabled because being disabled is part of who they are. They don't want others to desperately try to separate them from their disability because it is part of their identity. And using an adjective to describe a part of someone's identity doesn't mean that they're reduced to that identity, right? So, for instance, when we discuss, well, when we talk about other topics like race, for instance, or sexual orientation, it's very accepted to say, for instance, bisexual people or Black people. And we don't think that this reduces them to their race or sexual orientation. And the logic is the same, that we can call disabled people disabled without that being all that they are. And as mentioned, it's really important to hear what people themselves actually want to be called. And there is this quote here that we've included, which is from the disability activist and writer Emily Ladell. So I'm just going to read it. Disability is a state of being, a fact of life. It's not a dirty word. Furthermore, for so many people, disabled is so much more than a descriptor. It's an identity and culture unto itself. It is a sort of pride. So I'm disabled. I'm disabled just as much as I'm brown-haired, brown-eyed, glasses-wearing female. It's a part of me. It's a part of who I am. Right, so this is an example of our, our understanding of inclusive language evolving after we listen and try to understand people's experiences. So it's not always about others either, it's also about the way people think and talk about themselves, which changes the more they understand their own experiences and identities. Another misconception is that language doesn't offend anyone and makes everyone happy. Now, inclusive language is about avoiding language that harms certain groups of people, for example, through stereotyping or erasing them. But you may have noticed that some people are not particularly happy to see examples of inclusive language. For instance, if someone believes that only men can be good firefighters, they may be annoyed to see people who write firefighters instead of firemen. And it could be that the idea of people who aren't men being firefighters makes them very uncomfortable, who knows? Let's say someone strongly believes in equality, but they just don't understand the point of inclusive language. They think it's unnecessary to try to choose inclusive phrases, and so they might feel annoyed when they see it becoming more popular. They might also feel pressured to use it, and which in turn makes them want to use inclusive words even less. I think that's quite common. And these are examples of cases where inclusive language doesn't make someone happy. However, the crucial point here is that they are not harmed by the use of inclusive language. And that's what inclusive language is about. It's about avoiding potentially harmful language. Finally, the fifth misconception is that you should feel bad for using non-inclusive language. Now, it's definitely not a nice feeling when you realize that the language you've been using maybe your whole life might be harmful to other people. It's also not nice when we're called out on, especially if it's a public call out. However, I think it's fair to say that most of us have done it. I myself have, for sure. And I think even the most dedicated people are always in the process of learning. I think it's fair to say that, because after all, it's close to impossible to be informed about everything under the sun. There are a lot of people, and you can't be familiar with everyone's culture. On top of that, as we mentioned already, our understanding of what is and what isn't inclusive evolves through the time, and naturally we'll be making mistakes along the way. So it doesn't make us bad people if we've unintentionally used language that's not inclusive. But the important thing is that we do try to learn. We're open to it. So this is mostly a reminder to be kind to yourself, but also to be kind to other people who may not know that, who may not know so much about inclusive language, or about whether certain phrases are inclusive or not. So now that we have addressed what I believe are the most common misconceptions, Ninka will tell us why everyone wins if we choose to use inclusive language.
Yeah, thanks, Marina. I think those misconceptions are really useful to mention during this webinar. And I hope we can end with some positive vibes and stuff to take home. Because if you choose to use inclusive language, actually everyone wins. So there are three main benefits of using inclusive language. On the highest level, just as Marina already told, like the world is big, but it helps to start making it more inclusive by starting with your own website, with your own language, with your own conversations. So with using more inclusive language, you're actually helping to build a more inclusive world. And the second benefit is actually related to your website, and it helps to improve the user experience. And the third thing is, when customer behavior on your website shows that more and more people stick around and click around, it might even lead to some higher rankings. And that's, of course, what SEO is all about. And it might even help to help curb to drop the rankings. But I will talk a little bit about that later with some Google info on that. So the first part, as we already explained, people are likely to internalize what they hear often. So whether that's something that improves or breaks down the image that they have of the world or of other people, it will have an effect on them. In other words, the words you actually use on your website have the power to either make life for people around you easier and more fun, or harder and more frustrating. And the interesting thing is that you can be intentional about the first one. So the smiles and increased confidence around you will likely reflect their light back onto you, because you're probably noticed already when you try to give somebody around you a compliment, they most likely light up and take it in their smiles, and that kind of friendliness goes such a long way. So help build a more inclusive world. Same goes for your website. Of course, it's the content that's on your website should actually target your target audience. You should use a language that they are familiar with and they understand. But it still could have a friendly vibe for everyone. It should not help everyone to accomplish all their goals, but it's a smart business decision to make it more inclusive and more friendly, so the people that will visit your website will actually stick around and have a good impression of your brand. Also, it helps them to actually perform an action on your website. So signing up for your newsletter, or maybe making a first purchase, or writing a review about the course they did. These are all small steps that will lead to a better customer success experience. And even search engines like Google, they track how people behave on your website. Do they land on your site and leave again, or do they click around? Do they stick around for a bit? And if many people leave your site in a few seconds after landing there, that's not a good sign. And Google will know that your website actually doesn't help these people to reach their goals. So this might damage your rankings in the long run. And moreover, this is something we're a little bit proud of. Team Google has become more vocal about how they care about diversity and inclusion. As you see on the screen, the tweet from John Mueller, who is a search advocate, he recently, well, not so recently anymore, but at least some time back, wrote, if you write anything for SEO, please watch out for inclusive language. It doesn't take much work and you might not get it right all the time, but taking steps to get better matters too. And he actually did a full podcast on inclusive language and how that might impact your rankings as a website. Also, Google updated their instructions for quality raters. By itself, that's not something special. They do this regularly because the web changes and they need their raters to be up to date on that. But what's new is that they specifically instruct quality raters to watch out for content that promotes intolerance for the view, beliefs, or behavior of certain groups. And also for content that is dehumanizing stereotypes. So not being intentional about this might actually harm your rankings even further. So know that Google is paying attention to this as well, because we might have some people in the audience that don't care that much about inclusive language, but care a lot about their rankings and getting found by the right target group. So here you go. Google is paying attention as well. Let's conclude this webinar with some general tips. Marina, are you ready for it?
I'm so ready. Right. So yeah, these are very quickly some general tips you can keep in mind on your quest to use inclusive language in general, not just the Yoast feature. So number one, ask and listen. It's really important to remember to listen to the people who are directly affected by specific phrases, specific word choices. For example, what disabled people say about language that's inclusive to people with disabilities. And even if it doesn't immediately make sense to you, their advice and wishes should be respected. And also remember that social groups are, of course, not monoliths. People in such groups might not all have the same opinion on everything. So when talking about individuals, it's best to follow how they specifically want to be called. Tip number two, understand. So for me, this is one that's really made the biggest difference, trying to understand why certain language is non-inclusive and what and the reason why the alternative is better. Because every non-inclusive term is non-inclusive for a reason, and understanding the reasons behind it, this makes us more motivated to make the change because we understand its importance. We become more motivated to use it and to use it consistently too. So doing your own research can really help with that. And we do sincerely encourage you to look up information. And this is also why the feedback in our inclusive language analysis includes links to help articles where you can learn more about inclusive language. And tip number three, practice. Of course, like any other skill, this one requires practice. Some expressions are so entrenched in our language that it can be really hard to stop using them. For instance, if you feel, it can feel very natural to address any group of people with guys, as Ninka mentioned before, if that's what you've been hearing and saying your whole life. Or another example is words like crazy and stupid, which are just so common. But yeah, it's important to remember that trying to change and use alternatives takes time, and yeah, it's normal to slip, but yeah, I think the idea is to set out to be a bit better every day. Give yourself space, give yourself grace for making mistakes. And yeah, that's it for the tips. And I'm giving the floor back to Ninke,
Yeah,
who will tell
so
us where you can find more.
sure. We've tried to cover a lot in this webinar. We could go on for hours and hours. I know we don't have that time, so we'll keep it to this. We've been looking at what inclusive language is, how you can get started with writing more inclusively, how we all benefit from it, and how we can get rid of those common misconceptions. And it's actually it's a lot of work, and we can totally understand if you want some extra resources later. The first thing where you can start to find articles, resources that we actually refer to in our feature as well, is joa.st. So that's our Yoast short URL /inclusive, and that will lead you to the help page with all resources that are helpful in this case to just start exploring this whole topic. Also, if you're already a Yoast customer, inclusive language is incorporated in the all-around SEO course and in our SEO copywriting course on the Yoast SEO Academy. These are premium courses, so you would need a premium account to access those. Of course, we wouldn't come to this webinar without bearing gifts, so we have a coupon code for you that will save 15% on your first year of premium. So if you want to try those 2 courses that we mentioned, or explore the other premium features that we haven't covered at all during this webinar, just use this code learn-Yoast upon checkout, and it will be the discount will be applied automatically. Obviously, if you're already using Yoast SEO or Yoast SEO Premium, we would highly encourage you to make sure to switch that tab and use the inclusive language feature to get used to the alternatives that we offer and to learn more about actually writing more inclusive content. And of course, we would love it if you would even help us spread the word about this, because that's always a nice thing to do when making the world a little bit more inclusive instead of just your own website. So I think we're there. I'm not sure how much time we have left for questions. Carmen, you might be able to tell.
We have like 2 minutes, but I didn't see anything
No,
in
there are
the
no
Q&A box. So yeah, so I guess if we will have the replay up on our Academy website. So if anyone does have questions, maybe you can just share what's the best place to get more information about, using the power of inclusive language.
Yeah, so that joa.st/inclusive is the perfect place to start, but we're always able to help out with our support teams. You can just email support@yoast.com or send us a message on Twitter, Facebook, wherever you are, and we'll make sure to help you out.
Awesome. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all, Nika and Marina, for doing this webinar for us today. And we will see you all at the next one.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.